Hey, listen to this, it's like some heavy family gossip that's got everyone talking. Me looks at this and says, gosh, is there anything more important than a family? More important than the effect that these people have on one another? Well, for me it's just about the work. I'm finding age is something to play with. An aging person who thinks that they are at the top of their game and everything is just perfect, who trips and falls. I'm interested in that. He was doing fine on the meds he had been taking. They were working. Doctors changed the meds and it messed Nick up. People think they understand how grief looks in Hollywood, but most of the time what they're seeing is polished, filtered, and carefully managed. Black outfits, calm voices, statements cleared by teams, and rehearsed sadness that feels distant. That's what we're used to. But what's unfolding right now with Shirley MacLaine doesn't fit that mold at all. Not even close. This isn't staged. It's not controlled. And it's definitely not comfortable when someone like Shirley MacLaine, a woman who has spent over 70 years in this industry, who's lived through eras most people only read about, decides to speak freely at 91 years old. People stop scrolling and start paying attention. Not because she's loud, but because she's done protecting things that no longer deserve protection, and here's what's shaking people up. Shirley isn't just reacting to the loss of Rob Reiner. She's pulling back the curtain on what was happening before everything fell apart. What she shared completely flips the tone of this situation and exposes layers most people never saw coming. This wasn't some flashy interview or media setup. No bright lights, no scripted questions, no carefully timed release. This was a private conversation from her home just yesterday afternoon. And the details that came out of it have made a lot of powerful people uncomfortable, especially those who believed they had a full grasp on what life inside the Reiner household really looked like. Yeah. Anybody? Yeah. Over here. Are you in rehab more than once? That the boys can talk about that. Go ahead. She asked if you had been to rehab more than once. I was only there the one time. I've been more than once. It's a hard tip, huh? Sometimes it can be. How many times have you been? How many times have you been in and out of REA? I'll be honest. It's been like 17 or 18 times. How old were you now? Me. I'm 22. And you started when? Who's talking? Where were they? Oh, right. Right back. I started when I was like almost about to turn 15. He was there from like 19. Yeah, probably 15 to 19. And yeah, it's like been 3 or 4 years. This doesn't even work. I don't think. Yeah, it's working. It's working. Can I ask you one more question? So what was the turning point for you? What really made a difference? Well, during those years of like 14, 15, my parents were on top of me. And I think it's hard for a parent not to when your kid goes through that, because I don't know what it's like, and here's what stands out the most. Shirley wasn't emotional in the way people expect. No soft tears, no gentle memories, no rest in peace tone. She sounded angry, drained, like someone who's watched this kind of situation play out too many times and is tired of pretending it was unavoidable. She made it clear that what happened to Rob Reiner wasn't just a random ending. According to her, this was something closing in on him, something he felt coming but didn't know how to face. And the hardest part, she believes his biggest blind spot was the one no parent ever wants to admit exists. To understand why her words hit so hard, you have to understand her history with Rob. Their bond goes back decades. Not internet-deep friendships, but real ones formed before fame was filtered. They moved in the same circles, worked in the same spaces, challenged each other intellectually, and shared a deep belief in storytelling as something powerful, not disposable. Despite Shirley's reputation for spirituality and talking about past lives, she's always been razor-sharp when it comes to reading people in the present. And what she noticed during her last visit with Rob still haunts her. She told those close to her that about 3 weeks before everything ended, Rob wasn't himself at all. The fiery voice people recognized from television wasn't there. The passion, the humor, the confidence, all muted. She used one word that keeps echoing now. Shrinking. She described sitting with Rob and Michelle and feeling a weight in the room that made conversation feel forced. Instead of leading discussions or cracking jokes, Rob barely spoke. His attention stayed locked on the driveway outside the window. According to Shirley, he wasn't just distracted. He was waiting, watching, nervous about who might show up next. That detail alone changes everything. This is where the story shifts from a sad situation to something far more disturbing. Shirley claims the family was aware that Nick had been spiraling long before outside help ever entered the picture. And this wasn't a simple rough patch or temporary setback. She described it as a complete mental unraveling mixed with unchecked anger and entitlement. A dangerous combination that Rob believed he could calm down with patience, money, and love. And this is what triggered it. In no way am I imputing Rob Reiner Nato. I believe there's anything unoured. I think he seems by all accounts a loving father and appropriate father. But on this same Daily Mail report we were quoting from one actor who was on the set of Being Charlie. He's a cast member. Eric, 45, told the Daily Mail he found the dynamic between Rob and his son Nick troubling. They were fighting. They were arguing with each other while they were on the set. They did point out that this guy's scenes were ultimately cut from the film. Okay, maybe he's got an axe to grind. Quote, they were kissing each other on the lips, which was weird. They bickered or they were bickering. They were going off on each other on set. It wasn't comfortable. There was definitely hostility there. So, my question is there a likelihood Nick Reiner pulls a card from the Menendez defense? We're in California. It's going to be a California jury. And says he was molesting me my whole life. Shirley told him flat out that approach wasn't going to work. She warned him that trying to smooth over something this serious would only delay the explosion, not prevent it. And now looking back, she believes Rob knew that deep down, but couldn't bring himself to accept what it meant. That's the part that hits hardest. Not ignorance, but denial, not cruelty, but misplaced hope. And Shirley sounds like someone who's done watching that pattern repeat itself in silence. This story isn't just about grief anymore. It's about warning signs, family blind spots, and the dangerous idea that love alone can fix everything. And Shirley MacLaine sounds like someone who finally decided enough was enough. She didn't sugarcoat it at all. Shirley looked Rob Reiner straight in the face and told him, "You're feeding a shark and hoping it turns into a dolphin." That exact line is now echoing everywhere. And for good reason, because as more verified details surface, it's becoming painfully clear that she wasn't exaggerating. She was warning him, and here's where things need to be grounded in reality, not gossip. What's coming out now is being confirmed by people who were actually present, not by outsiders guessing from headlines. The idea that Nick Reiner suddenly ped out of nowhere simply doesn't line up with what insiders are saying. According to what's emerging and what Shirley strongly hinted at, this wasn't a single breaking point. It was a slow, dangerous escalation that had been building behind closed doors for months. There were reportedly multiple visits from law enforcement to the Brentwood property back in October and November. Those visits never made headlines, never turned into public records anyone could easily access. And that wasn't accidental. When you carry the kind of influence Rob Reiner had, problems can be quietly redirected. Officers can be reassured it's a family issue. Situations can be framed as stress, pressure, or a temporary rough phase. And Rob did exactly that. Not because he didn't see the danger, but because he didn't want to expose his son to public judgment. Up until the very end, Rob was trying to shield Nick's name. He didn't want his child reduced to a headline or frozen in a single image the world would never forget. Ironically, that's exactly where things ended up. Shirley spoke directly about the image that's now burned into public memory, Nick's face on the news, and she didn't dodge it or soften her reaction. She said when she saw it, she didn't recognize the kid she once watched grow up. What she saw instead was emptiness. No emotion, no recognition, no connection. That observation lines up with something quietly shared by Tom Cruise in private conversations after the news broke. Tom and Rob go way back. A Few Good Men wasn't just another project. It was a career-defining moment for both of them. Their bond wasn't surface level. Tom Cruise is known for fierce loyalty, and according to people close to the situation, he was one of the first to offer private security for Jake and Romy, the surviving siblings, almost immediately. That alone tells you how serious things felt behind the scenes. Even Tom, someone who's seen every extreme this industry can produce, was reportedly shaken by what insiders described from inside the home. Well, for me it's just about the work. I just like doing it. You don't think about what something is going to turn into. Something will either, last or it won't. You put things in perspective because I was in a television show that most young people have never heard of. You better like what you're doing and enjoy the process because even if something you've made stands the test of time for a while, it's never going to stand the test of forever. So enjoy what you're doing and films will go away and things go on and move. So just enjoy the process and enjoy doing what you're doing. He was doing fine on the meds he had been taking. They were working. Doctors changed the meds and it messed Nick up. It messed him up profoundly. Without a shadow of a doubt, the mental health system in America has failed the Reiner family because this wasn't about a random break-in or a heated moment that got out of hand. It was about control. Money played a role, yes, but it wasn't just about finances. At its core, this was about a grown man who believed the world owed him something because of his last name and parents who loved deeply but struggled to draw a line strong enough to stop the momentum. Shirley spoke with particular emotion when mentioning Michelle Reiner. She described Michelle as the constant peacekeeper, the one who always stepped between Rob and Nick when arguments started to boil, the mediator, the buffer. And that's the detail that hurts the most. Shirley believes Michelle's instinct to protect and calm everyone may be what placed her directly in harm's path that night. Not recklessness, but love. What Shirley is really exposing goes beyond one household. She's talking about a pattern she's seen repeat itself in Hollywood again and again. When parents become legends, their children often grow up fighting shadows they can't escape. Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker. He was an institution. And for Nick, living under that weight didn't inspire pride. It bred resin. Shirley recalled a conversation she had with Michelle months earlier that now feels chilling. Michelle admitted they were planning to change the locks on the guest house, not out of cruelty, but fear. Fear that boundaries had already been crossed too many times. That single detail says more than any headline ever could. This wasn't sudden. It wasn't unexpected. It was a situation spiraling quietly until it reached a point no one could talk their way out of anymore. And Shirley sounds like someone who's done pretending these patterns don't exist. The locks weren't about keeping strangers out. They were about keeping Nick out when he wasn't in control. Sit with that for a second. Living behind gates in Brentwood, surrounded by wealth and security, but feeling unsafe around your own child. That kind of fear isn't normal, and it's the kind people never talk about. Rob and Michelle weren't trapped by money or fame. They were trapped by love. They couldn't bring themselves to involve authorities the way outsiders think they should have because at the end of the day, Nick was still their son. That's the emotional prison Shirley MacLaine exposed, and it's chilling, but the most explosive part of her revelation wasn't just about the household. It was about the silence surrounding it. Shirley didn't hesitate to call out the people who stood by and said nothing. She said there were agents, managers, and so-called friends who knew Nick was unstable. People who heard the threats, people who saw the behavior escalating, and yet they kept inviting him into rooms he shouldn't have been in. They kept stroking his ego. They kept pretending this was just artistic chaos instead of something deeply dangerous. Shirley made it clear that silence didn't come from ignorance. It came from comfort. At 91 years old, Shirley has nothing left to protect. No careers to preserve, no favors to maintain. She flat out named the culture that allows this kind of situation to grow unchecked. She said people watched Nick unravel in real time and chose politeness over confrontation because it made dinners awkward. Now that everything is unfolding publicly, it's becoming clear why the family is shattered, but also why the legal road ahead is going to be brutal for the defense. Looks at this and says, gosh, is there anything more important than a family? More important than the effect that these people have on one another. And if there's anything I've learned, and I'm continuing to learn it, is get your stuff straightened out with your parents because that's going to affect your stuff with your child or children. And fortunately, I got that straight with my dad before he went. You know, I would sit and I think it was the happiest time we spent together, his year of dying. He talked about how nothing was as important as love. Not money, not fame, not competition, not progress, not overachievement, nothing. Nick's attorney, Alan Jackson, isn't brought in for small problems. He's known for taking on cases that are already in deep water. The strategy is predictable. Frame this as a mental health collapse. Push for lack of awareness. Argue diminished responsibility. But Shirley MacLaine isn't buying it. And from what's being hinted at, neither is the district attorney because the details being quietly acknowledged tell a very different story. Without getting graphic, the evidence suggests intent and follow-through. This wasn't a moment of confusion followed by panic. The forensic findings point toward actions taken after everything ended, actions that suggest awareness and effort. There are indications that attempts were made to cover tracks, to clean, to buy time. And that matters because it speaks to consciousness, to understanding, to knowing something irreversible had occurred. That's why this case feels heavier by the day. The only faint glimmer of light in this situation has been the way industry heavyweights have surrounded the surviving siblings, Jake and Romy. People like Tom Cruise stepping in quietly, offering protection and support without cameras or announcements. But even that feels fragile. Shirley herself said it best. No amount of influence, awards, or political pull could stop a disaster that was growing inside Rob's own living room. That reality humbles everyone watching. When Shirley speaks, there's a spiritual weight behind her words. She believes deeply in the soul. And she shared something heartbreaking about Rob's. She believes he stayed in that house, stayed in that situation because he truly thought love could correct chemistry, fix dependency, and heal years of damage. That's the tragic flaw of good parents. They believe love is armor. Shirley said it plainly, love isn't armor when you're dealing with demons. Sometimes love doesn't protect. Sometimes it puts a target on your back. We also can't ignore the timeline of that night. Authorities arrived around 10:00 p.m. but reports suggest the situation reached its breaking point earlier. That leaves a disturbing window of unanswered time. Who did Nick speak to during that gap? Did he reach out for advice? Did anyone tell him what to do next? There are whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, about a call to someone known for fixing problems. If that turns out to be true, this situation could widen fast. We didn't know how it was going to end. We didn't know what essentially the plot was. We trusted Billy and Izzy. Jack and I adored each other and that's all we knew. Shirley hinted that investigators are combing through phone records, not just to understand what happened, but to uncover the ecosystem around Nick. The suppliers, the enablers, the people draining him financially and pushing him to demand more from Rob and Michelle. It's disturbing on every level. Two people who spent their lives creating stories about hope, humanity, and connection ended up trapped in a nightmare fueled by silence and entitlement. And Shirley MacLaine sounds determined to make sure that silence doesn't win this time. The irony of it all is impossible to ignore. Movies like The Princess Bride and Stand By Me were built around innocence, friendship, and the fragile line between good and bad. Yet Rob Reiner's own story ended in the shadow of the very darkness he spent his career examining. Shirley MacLaine reflected on how often Rob used to talk about Stand By Me and the moment when childhood innocence slips away. He understood that darkness can live inside young boys. He wasn't naive about it. He made an entire legacy exploring that truth. But what he never imagined was that one day that darkness would be sitting across from him at his own breakfast table. That realization is what makes this story hit harder than typical celebrity headlines. This isn't gossip. It's a modern tragedy unfolding in real time in Los Angeles. A story about power, love, denial, and consequences colliding in the worst possible way. Right now, prosecutors are reportedly examining special circumstance allegations. In California, that puts the most serious penalties on the table. While the current governor makes the harshest outcome unlikely, life without parole is very much a reality if a conviction happens. Try to picture Nick Reiner's current situation for a moment. Sitting alone in a downtown Los Angeles cell, coming back to clarity after whatever state he was in, and realizing the safety net that always caught him is completely gone. The parents who smoothed things over, the parents who made calls, hired lawyers, paid bills, and softened consequences, they're gone by actions that can never be undone. There's no one left to shield him now. No one left to call. Shirley MacLaine said something that stunned people when she was asked how she felt about Nick's future. She said she hopes he lives a very long time. At first, that sounds cold, but she explained herself clearly. She doesn't want revenge. She wants accountability. She wants him to sit with the weight of what was lost every single day. In Shirley's worldview, this isn't about punishment. It's about balance. She believes karma doesn't rush, but it never misses. And in her eyes, there's no escaping that reckoning. Meanwhile, funeral arrangements are being handled quietly and with extreme care. Romy and Jake are doing everything they can to protect their parents' legacy from becoming spectacle. No cameras, no chaos, just dignity. But even without public displays, you can feel the grief ripple through the industry. It's heavy. It's real. Statements coming out from longtime friends like Billy Crystal, who shared decades of history with Rob, are short, broken, and full of disbelief. Got it. So Tim, we just heard from Rob and Michelle Reiner's two other children. What are they saying? Well, they were not here in court, but shortly after this court appearance, they released a joint statement kind of describing the heartbreak and horror that has happened to them over the last several days. This is the statement from Jake and Romy Reiner saying, quote, "Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents, they were our best friends. We are grateful for the outpouring of condolences, kindness, and support we have received, not only from family and friends, but people from all walks of life. We now ask for respect and privacy, for speculation to be tempered with compassion and humanity, and for our parents to be remembered for the incredible lives they lived and the love they gave." Wow, yet, it isn't sadness that's cutting through the noise the most. It's Shirley's anger. And honestly, that anger matters because someone needs to say this plainly. This wasn't just a tragic ending. This was a systemic failure. A failure to intervene early. A failure to take warning signs seriously and a failure to accept that love alone doesn't always fix what's broken. Shirley made it clear. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones we need boundaries from the strongest. Sometimes protection doesn't look like patience. It looks like hard decisions. Her words aren't comfortable and they aren't meant to be. But they force a conversation Hollywood usually avoids. One about entitlement, silence, and what happens when power shields problems instead of confronting them. This story isn't just about one family. It's about a culture that looks away until it's too late. And Shirley MacLaine sounds determined to make sure that discomfort leads to accountability this time. There's another layer to this situation that feels uncomfortable to even bring up: the estate. Talking about money in the middle of loss can feel wrong, but in a case like this, it matters whether people like it or not. The legal reality is unavoidable. Under California's Slayer statute, Nick Reiner would be legally blocked from inheriting anything if convicted. That means none of the wealth, none of the assets, none of the legacy Rob spent his lifetime building would ever reach him. Everything from long-running residuals tied to Seinfeld, All in the Family and Rob's own films would pass directly to Jake and Romy. But here's the question no one really wants to ask out loud. Do they even want it? Can anyone look at that money without seeing what it represents? Shirley MacLaine shared something quietly devastating. She said Romy told her she doesn't care about the estate at all. She just wants the house gone, sold, leveled, wiped clean from the map. She can't imagine anyone ever living inside those walls again. And honestly, who could blame her? That house isn't a home anymore. It's a reminder. A place where fear lived longer than peace. As the trial approaches in January, more details are going to surface whether the family wants them to or not. Stories that were buried for years will come back into the light. The arguments, the interventions that didn't work, the moments Rob tried to draw lines, and the moments Nick pushed back even harder. We're going to hear about times Rob attempted tough love only to be met with anger and retaliation. We're going to hear about chances that slipped by because no one wanted to escalate things too far, and this is where Shirley's words matter most. She warned people not to frame this as a sudden breakdown or a random ending. She described it as a slow-motion collision, something everyone could see unfolding but didn't know how to stop. Not because the signs weren't there, but because calling it out felt uncomfortable. Rob Reiner believed deeply in people. He believed in fairness, in justice, in democracy, in family above all else. That belief shaped his work and his life. The cruel irony is that the very values he lived by are what left him exposed. His faith in love, patience, and second chances blinded him to the urgency of the danger forming inside his own home. This isn't just the loss of a public figure. It's the collapse of a legacy, not because of outside forces, but because of untreated mental health struggles mixed with unchecked entitlement and silence from those who should have spoken louder. Shirley ended her conversation with a thought that left a heavy silence behind it. She said, Rob is at peace now. In her belief, he's with the spirits, reunited with his father, Carl, free from fear. But the real struggle belongs to those still here, the ones left to sort through grief, anger, and unanswered questions. She admitted something raw and unpolished, something no publicist would ever approve. She said forgiveness isn't guaranteed. That healing doesn't come on a schedule and pretending otherwise helps no one. No spin, no rehearsed sympathy, just the truth. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to sit with. At the end of the day, Shirley MacLaine isn't trying to be a spokesperson or a symbol. She's just an older woman who lost a close friend and is angry that it ever reached this point. And maybe that raw honesty is the most respectful way to honor Rob Reiner right now. No spin, no polishing the edges, just the unfiltered truth, the kind Rob himself would have written into one of his own stories. Shirley isn't interested in protecting reputations anymore. She's interested in telling it exactly how it happened, even if it makes people uncomfortable.